They doubted her, mocked her, ignored her. But in the silence before the shot, she saw what no one else could, and one trigger pull proved them all wrong. The air in the ruined municipal building tasted of dust and cold cement. For 3 days, it had been their world. A world of shattered marble floors, overturned desks, and wind that whispered through gaping holes in the concrete walls. Sergeant Cale spat on the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet. Look at her, still polishing that rifle like it's a show pony. Across the room, Specialist Anya Petrova didn't flinch. Her movements were a study in economy, her hands gliding over the stock and barrel of her standard-issue service rifle. A soft, rhythmic shick-shick of the cleaning cloth was the only reply. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She had felt Cale's eyes on her since she'd been assigned to his fire team. Reese, the team's medic, just grunted from where he was inventorying his med kit. He didn't join the mockery, but his silence was its own form of agreement. To them, Anya was a box to be checked, a replacement for a man they'd lost. A quiet, slight woman barely 5 years out of her teens, who had the vacant stare of someone who didn't yet understand the stakes. They thought her silence was fear. Her diligence, inexperience. You know, rookie, Cale continued, his voice loud enough to echo slightly in the cavernous space. Out here, that thing's gonna get dirty again in about 5 seconds. Might want to spend more time watching the windows and less time playing house. Anya slid the bolt back into place. The sound of oiled steel locking together was crisp, final. She shouldered the rifle, testing its weight, its balance. It felt like an extension of her own arm. She said nothing. Her composure was a wall they couldn't seem to scale, and it irritated them. Suddenly, a sound that wasn't the wind. Crack! A divot the size of a fist exploded from the concrete pillar just above Cale's head, showering him in gray dust and stinging chips. He dropped to the floor instantly, cursing. "Sniper! Son of a bitch!" Reese was already flat, dragging his kit behind a slab of fallen wall. "Where did that come from? Did you see a muzzle flash?" "No." "Nothing," Kyle yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline. He crawled toward his own rifle, a high-powered marksman model with an enormous scope. He's good. He's real good. 13th floor, maybe 14th of the apartment block. Has to be. He settled himself behind a barricade of overturned metal, desks, pushing the barrel of his weapon through a small gap. He put his eye to the scope, his breathing heavy and ragged in the sudden, suffocating silence. Anya had moved, too, but not with the frantic energy of the others. She had sunk down behind a low marble counter, her back to the wall. She was still. Her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to a faint melody. Her eyes were closed. Another crack. This time, the round whined through the open space where a grand window had once been, punching a neat hole through a steel filing cabinet on the far side of the room. The metallic ping of the impact was terrifyingly clear. "Damn it!" Cale hissed, his knuckles white on his rifle. "I can't see him! Too much debris! Too many goddamn shadows!" He scanned the building opposite them, floor by floor. Frustration radiated from him, like heat. He was the designated marksman. This was his job. He was supposed to be their protector, the one who owned the space beyond these walls. And he was failing. "He's playing with us," Reese whispered from his position. "Just letting us know he's there. He's got us pinned." For a full minute, the only sound was Cale's frustrated breathing and the ever-present whistling of the wind. Anya remained in her spot, unmoving. She opened her eyes. They weren't looking out the window or at the building where the shots originated. They were looking at the floor, specifically at a small, undisturbed puddle of stagnant rainwater near the center of the room. She watched the tiny ripples on its surface, the way they shivered and danced fractions of a second after a gust of wind blew through the building. She was watching the echoes of the air itself. The radio on Kyle's hip crackled to life, the sudden burst of static making both men jump. "Alpha 1, this is Bravo 6. What's your status? We are pinned down on the west flank. Need covering fire to suppress enemy position for evac. Over." Cale didn't dare respond. Transmitting would give the sniper another target to home in on. He just lay there, useless, trapped behind his scope. The plea from Bravo 6 hung in the air, a testament to their own powerlessness. Anya pushed herself to her feet. The movement was so quiet, so deliberate, it barely registered at first. She slung her rifle over her shoulder, the one they thought was a show pony. She walked past Reese, her boots making no sound on the dusty marble. She walked past Cale, who was still muttering curses to himself. She stopped at a different hole in the wall. Not a window, but a jagged tear in the concrete. Lower down, partially obscured by a fallen ventilation duct, it offered a completely different angle. An impossible one from their perspective. Kyle finally noticed her. His head snapped around, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. Petrova! What in the hell do you think you're doing? Get down! That's not cover! Anya didn't look at him. She didn't look at the building opposite. She knelt, her movements fluid, practiced. She stared into the distance, her naked eyes scanning for something Cale, with his powerful scope, had missed. She leaned, her head to the side, listening one last time, for the shot, for the echo, for the way the sound bent around the steel skeletons of the dead city. "What are you doing?" Kyle demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "You'll get your head blown off." Anya finally spoke. Her voice was low, calm, and carried no trace of fear or bravado. It was as clear and precise as the click of her rifle's safety being disengaged. "He's not in the apartment block," she said. "He's in the crane." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the wind. Cale stared at Anya, then glanced instinctively toward the skeletal arm of a massive construction crane that loomed over the adjacent city block, a metal ghost against the gray sky. It was hundreds of meters farther away than the apartment building. A much more difficult, almost impossible shot. "The crane?" Cale finally scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you insane? Nobody's making that shot. And why would he be all the way out there?" Anya didn't turn to face him. Her focus remained fixed on the distant steel structure. "The sound," she said, her voice even. "The crack of the shot arrives a full half-second before the sonic boom hits the wall. The delay is too long for the apartment block. The echo off the Tavanen building comes from the east. It only makes sense if the origin is farther west." She shifted her position slightly, pressing her cheek against the stock of her rifle. "And the impacts are too high. He's not shooting across. He's shooting down. The angle of trajectory is steep." Reese, from his cover, peered around the concrete slab, looking from the crane to Anya and back again. He said nothing, but the certainty in his own assessment was beginning to fracture. He'd heard the sounds, too, but had dismissed them as the confusing acoustics of a ruined city. Anya hadn't. She had listened to them, understood them. Kyle was speechless for a moment. Her explanation wasn't a guess, it was a calculation. It was geometry and physics, delivered with the calm certainty of a mathematician solving an equation. It was a language he was supposed to speak better than anyone else here. Crack, a new shot. But this one didn't hit their building. It struck the ground 30 meters in front of them, kicking up a plume of dust and dirt. It was aimed at the street, a warning shot for anyone from Bravo 6 who might dare to try and move. The angle of the impact crater, a deep gouge in the pavement, was steep, exactly as she'd said. It could not have come from the apartment block. Cale's face went pale. He looked through his scope again, frantically panning past the apartments, and slewing it towards the distant crane. His movements were jerky, angry. "I still don't see anything. It's a goddamn skeleton. Where would he even hide?" "He's in the operator's cab," Anya said. Her voice was quieter now, all her focus narrowing down her rifle barrel. "There's a glint, a reflection. It's been there the whole time. You thought it was just the sun on the glass, but the sun is behind the clouds." Kyle zoomed his scope to maximum magnification, his breath fogging the air. "I see it," he whispered, his voice stripped of all its earlier bravado. "My God, how did you—" Anya didn't answer. There was no time. The radio crackled again, this time with more urgency. "Alpha 1, we can't wait. Garcia's bleeding out. We need that covering fire now." The plea galvanized her. She exhaled slowly, her breath a thin white plume in the cold air. The world outside the jagged hole in the wall disappeared. Cale, Reese, the cold room, the dust, it all melted away. There was only the concrete ledge her rifle rested on, The slight tremor in the air from the wind and the target. A tiny box of glass and steel, suspended against a bleak sky, more than 800 meters away. She didn't have a high-powered scope like Kale's. She had her standard issue optic. Reliable, but not made for this kind of distance. She wouldn't be aiming at a man. She would be aiming at a single pixel in her vision. She began to breathe. A slow, deep inhale. A long, controlled exhale. She did it 3 times, her trigger finger resting lightly beside the guard. On the 4th breath, she let half of it out and held. The silence in the room was now absolute. Kale and Reese were no longer soldiers or superiors. They were spectators. They watched her, this quiet rookie, become preternaturally still. Her body was a rock. Her focus, a laser. She made a minute adjustment to her aim, compensating for the wind she had felt on her face, the wind she had seen disturbing the puddle on the floor. She knew the bullet would drop significantly over that distance. She knew it would drift to the right. She aimed high and to the left of the glint at a piece of empty sky. It was a shot of pure instinct, built on a foundation of 1,000 hours of training they knew nothing about. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The report of her rifle was not like the enemy's. It wasn't a sharp, startling crack. It was a single deep, authoritative boom. A statement of intent that echoed through the ruined building and out into the city. The recoil drove the butt of the rifle into her shoulder, a familiar and steadying impact. She didn't move. She didn't lift her head. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching the tiny, invisible messenger she had just sent on its way. She followed its path through the air, her breathing still held. 1 second. 2 seconds. Kale and Reese held their breath, their eyes wide, staring out at the distant crane. They saw nothing. The glint in the operator's cab was still there. For a heart-stopping moment, they thought she had missed. The silence stretched on, deafening. The silence held for another heartbeat, stretching into an eternity. Kyle kept his scope trained on the crane's cab, his own breathing forgotten. He was waiting for the glint to reappear, for the telltale sign of movement, for the proof that she had missed. Nothing. Then it happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no fire. The small pane of glass in the operator's cab, the one that held the persistent glint, simply dissolved. It vanished into a dark, empty hole. A fraction of a second later, the entire cab swayed, a tiny, almost imperceptible lurch, like a head nodding off to sleep. A distant, faint tinkle of falling glass, too faint for a normal ear but audible in the heightened tension, reached them a second after that. The sniper was gone. The threat was neutralized. Kale slowly lowered his rifle. The weapon, his symbol of expertise and authority, suddenly felt heavy and useless in his hands. He looked at the crane, then at the slight woman kneeling on the floor. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? He, with his superior equipment and his years of experience, had been staring at the wrong building. She, with her standard rifle and quiet observation, had seen the truth. The radio on his hip erupted, the voice from Bravo 6 no longer desperate, but jubilant. Target down. I repeat, target is down. We have a clean path. Evac is proceeding. Good shooting, Alpha 1. Damn good shooting. The message was for his squad, but the praise was not his to claim. Anya finally moved. She pulled the bolt of her rifle back smoothly. The hot, spent shell casing ejected with a sharp flick, spinning through the air before landing on the marble floor with a metallic clink. The sound was final, definitive. She slid the bolt forward, chambering a new round, then engaged the safety. Her movements were clean, economical, devoid of any celebration. It was the same meticulous care she had shown when cleaning the weapon. It wasn't a show pony. It was a tool, and she was a master of her craft. She rose to her feet and walked back to her post, her face as calm and unreadable as it had been all morning. She didn't look at Kale or Reese. She simply resumed her watch, as if she had done nothing more remarkable than tie her boot. The spell of silence broke. Reese let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding since she fired. He looked at Kale, whose expression was a complex mixture of shock, humiliation, and a dawning, profound respect. Kale walked over to her. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her space. She didn't turn to acknowledge him, her gaze still fixed on the city outside. He held out his own canteen. "Here," he said, his voice rough. "You should have some water." Anya turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was no anger in them, no triumph, just a quiet, steady depth. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, took the canteen, had a short drink, and handed it back. "Thank you, Sergeant." The use of his title felt different now. It was no longer the formality of a subordinate. It felt like a courtesy, offered between equals. He took the canteen back, his fingers fumbling with the cap. He still needed to understand. It wasn't just about the shot. It was about the calm, the certainty. How she had seen what he and Reese had completely missed. "Petrova," he began, his voice softer now. "Anya, how did you know? The echo, the angle, all of it. Where did you learn to see the world like that?" Anya turned her gaze back to the ruined city, to the wind that still whispered through the broken buildings. She was quiet for a long moment, and Cale thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with a history he couldn't begin to fathom. It was the sound of cold winters, of vast open spaces, and of a silence deeper than anything in this loud, violent city. "My home is in Siberia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where I grew up, we didn't have a crane. We had a valley. And we didn't hunt men." She paused, her eyes focused on a place far beyond the horizon. "We hunted wolves. And in the winter, the wind is the only thing that moves for 1,000 kilometers. It tells you everything if you know how to listen."